Thank you, first of all, to the organizers of this beautiful and wonderful day. It has been really inspiring, and I'm honored to be here with this group of scholars. And what I'm going to present to you today was kind of prompted by Rosa, and departs from my doctoral dissertation to a very small extent, and I'm going to explain you why in a short time. So I first of all also apologize because you have seen beautiful pictures until now in the previous presentations, and you will see just a couple of photographs in the first two slides of mine, and then just text or photographs of articles. Because I'm dealing with the work of Ada Louise Huxtable, who most of you probably already know, but labels that were associated to this woman professional were incredibly varied. You can see some of them here in the slide, but she was best known for being the first full-time architecture critic ever appointed to a national newspaper when the New York Times appointed her as such in 1963. Her writing was deeply rooted in the New York scene and in the United States. Especially, her name is now associated with the debates over historic preservation that were taking place in the mid-60s in New York. But again, she's the central figure of my exploration, but this session is about archives. So what about her archive? Here we have Maristella Casciato, who just spoke, and her archive, the Ada Louise Huxtable archive, is actually at the Getty Research Institute, and I had the opportunity to engage with her archive and her husband's archive precisely at the Getty over the past few years during my PhD research, where I engaged with her criticism, not just as a source, but as an object of inquiry itself. I really wanted to understand how architectural criticism is constructed and built, and especially how it could shape a local debate, an American debate, even when it referred to experiences coming from far-off cultural contexts. So I adopted the biographical lens of her work to raise transversal questions about how knowledge travels and about the challenges and frictions that are inherent to this transfer of knowledge across contexts, issues like content dilution or biases or even stereotypes. And at that time, the starting point was the archive of published writings, also because there was COVID, so it was like kind of a forced choice. But the starting point were the articles that she was publishing, first in the specialized press over the 50s, and then in the 60s in newspapers, especially in the New York Times. They're kind of they are kind of a traceable printed record of her work. And from those texts, then, when I had the opportunity to go to see the actual archive, I was able to investigate some travel experiences, which kind of had some connecting points with Robert Venturi's and her networks of correspondence, but also the intellectual landscape that she was kind of inhabiting in those occasions. But with this tentative today, I'm trying to trace how she observed, narrated, but also contributed to shaping a reception of the work of Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown by relying essentially on the published writings. And the biographical lens somehow in this exploration remains, because here you see on the right a kind of chronology of what I had explored during my doctoral dissertation, and then so a sort of biographical track, and then on the left some of the articles that she actually publishes and that all start to refer to the Venturi's work, and in this sense they kind of start appearing during a moment moment where she experiences a career shift, in the sense that it's the moment when her role starts to be kind of more established. Her becomes a more established voice in the New York scene, but in the publishing sector at large. And then in 1973, she gets to become part of the editorial board of the newspaper. And so her role changes, and also the kind of writing she produces change. While in the first decade of her commitment at the newspaper, articles were strictly linked to events and to the contingencies of what was happening in the city or in the world. When she becomes part of the editorial board, her writings are less dictated by the news cycle, and kind of becomes a little bit richer in reflection, and sometimes appear with a less strict periodicity, I have to say. So I will start by just framing, because we don't have much time at our disposal, by the points that she raises in her work, and then a couple of words on the approach that she adopts. First of all, I would like to make a comment on the fact that, of course, she starts by discussing the work of Robert Venturi, but she almost always includes, except for, I think, in one article up to what I've read until now, Denise Scott Brown in her writings. And in fact, I remember that this acknowledgement is noted also by Scott Brown in her essay that was mentioned earlier today by Frida on sexism in the architectural star system. Still, I have to think that we have a lot of food for thought in the sense of the inherent power dynamics, because she was actually part of the Pritzker Prize Committee that awards the Pritzker only to Robert Venturi. But apart from that, well, when I was looking at her criticism, something that I noticed and I thoroughly enjoyed was seeing how she characterized architects for her public, because we have to remember that she was writing for newspaper readers, so essentially mostly non-architects. And sometimes it was coming from her superiors, so it was part of a direction that the newspaper was giving her. I found documents in the correspondence between her editor and her asking for physical characterizations of the architects that she was discussing the work of. And in the sense of the Venturis, she describes him as a reserved, unostentatious man in his mid-40s, and Denise Scott Brown as a still thin, pure pre-Raphaelite young woman. And in the sense that, well, of course, she mentions both, but she also often mentions the firm. So I would then move to the points that she makes, in the sense that in this article that you see here, which is kind of the first great prose that she publishes about the work of the Venturis, she starts by discussing a generational shift. She observes here how a new group of theorists started looking at the American city, or better, what she describes as the America that everyone except Middle America hates. And she also remarks that while for others, and here I brought an excerpt of Peter Blake's criticism, the work of the Venturis was just a provocation. She acknowledged that the approach that she noticed in these new voices was historically and intellectually valid. She called it the case for chaos, as you can see here in the title, and claimed that it was a serious and a conscious reaction to the limits of modernism. Far from being a stylistic stunt, she associated this new direction with a new idea of order based on inclusion and plurality, and characterized it by its almost unavoidable at this point ambiguity. In this sense, she explained her readers that Venturi did not turn away from urban complexity, but studied it and engaged with its messiness. And in this article that you see here from 1970, she returned to this generational shift, but framed it as an aesthetic and an ideological, but also as a religious conflict. She defined this new generation as a generation of heretics. She spoke of faiths, and she spoke of them going against what in another article she referred to as the gospel according to Gideon and Gropius. So the approach of this new generation, as she described it, was a kind of elite populism. And in the sense, a presentation of earlier today kind of gave me also inputs of like going deeper into this phrasing. But this elite populism was reversing the elitism of modernism in multiple directions, as she put it. On the one hand, she noted how they were embracing, of course, the mundane, the anonymous, the banal, and overlaying this with an environmental consciousness. But on the other hand, she was also noticing that they were making the canon more inclusive by reevaluating a series of objects of interest, but also some figures that were previously dismissed. And in another piece that she published in the same year, titled Peacock Feathers and Pink Plastic, she makes the example of Bruce Goff, who was the subject of what she deemed as a much-needed retrospective exhibition in the same year at the Architectural League in New York. In this article that you see here, she reviewed an exhibition, this time on the work of Venturi and Rauch, held at the Whitney Museum. And this is the occasion, actually, she has to explore and describe more in detail what was the alternative that they were proposing. She described it as dumb but sophisticated architecture, complex, respectful, intelligent. She uses these terms, blending context without imposing their personal style. And while commenting actually on the aspects of the installations that she found more or less valid, she has the opportunity to describe, of course, the setting as mimicking highway billboards full of slogans, bright colors, and catchphrases. And in this sense, she also uses this opportunity to describe the use that the firm does of American pop culture, so of the commercial strip, of suburbia, and roadside architecture. On a side note, she mentioned some of the catchphrases that were part of the exhibition landscape, and in brackets, she quoted, for example, and I think it's quite subtle that she mentions this one: learn from what you don't like. And also, in another part of the same text, she acknowledges that the firm's work is a deliberate revolt, again, subtly remarking, however, in brackets, that it's a revolt that is occurring within the establishment at the Whitney Museum. In this sense, she kind of, even if she embraced their provocations, she remained somehow cautious. She quipped that they were producing theory like hotcakes, a phrase that I think sounds both admiring and cautionary. The risk, she wrote, was that the theoretical overload might outpace actual building, that ideas, if detached from practice, could turn into mannerism. And she warned of replacing one orthodoxy, modernism, with another, orthodox ambiguity. And before, Maristella mentioned the correspondence that is held at the Getty. Unfortunately, when I was there, this was not the subject of my investigations, but there was a folder which I found quite, I don't know, refreshing at the end of the day, which was titled Nice Letters. And I happened to photograph the answer of Bob Venturi to her review of Learning from Las Vegas. And I think that in this sense, it's kind of a reaction also to this comment that she put out about the risks of too much theoretical speculation. And I'm going to conclude by returning on to the last point about the methods, the way she approaches this, in the sense that even if she was kind of embracing and not explicitly destroying like these new standpoints as others were doing, she kept a real ambivalence in her approach to this new theoretical production. This ambivalence occurs and reappears in these articles through terms, through comments in brackets, and to very subtle comments. But at the same time, it returns later on in 1997 in her book titled The Unreal America, where she criticizes the excesses of such spectacles that she outlined. And where she clearly separated the critical depth of the early Venturi from what followed, calling it obscurantism. And to conclude, and like I want to conclude by returning to the role that she has, in the sense that when she describes the work of Robert Venturi and Denise Scott Brown, she doesn't go over the contents of the book. She doesn't describe the diagrams, but she tells stories about motels, about diners, street signs, or about the landscape of the exhibitions that she visited. And in this sense, I think that it's a way of somehow translating and making, reframing this theory for her public. And I think it's ironic because these places were already familiar to the public. They were part of Middle America, but as they became part of theory, they became something that necessitated mediation. And this all goes back to the role of the architect as a mediator, the architecture critic as a mediator, in the sense that her work is fundamentally placed in a site of as a hinge between publics characterized by different degrees of specialization, competencies, and level of understanding. So the role of the architecture critic as a mediator somehow here does not recur as it did in my dissertation between contexts, but rather between publics and interlocutors. Thank you.